Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of our educational series here at Five Plan Partners. My name is Mark Hume, and I'm excited today to talk a little bit about two planning topics that I think are important for each of you to consider in 2023. Our two topics are going to be a review of your homeowner's insurance coverage and a review of the names on the deed and mortgage to your home or homes if those are applicable to you. So the first topic we want to talk about is homeowners insurance. And the thing that I've noticed is that, and probably everyone has noticed, is that the cost of building materials has really increased a lot over the past couple of years. And even though we're seeing a softening in some of those commodity prices, it's not trickling down to the retail side of things, which impacts us as the consumer. So one thing that I think is important, and it's more important if you've had your homeowner's insurance policy in place for a longer period of time, and probably not as important to review, but it's still worth your while if you've just recently purchased your home and taken on a new homeowner's insurance policy. But what we want to review and what we want to understand is that if your home was totaled tomorrow, is the current policy that is in place, does it provide sufficient coverage to rebuild your home with the benefits provided in the declaration page of your policy? Now, the appropriate budget or cost per square foot to rebuild your home is very individual. It's very specific to you and the finishes that you require. The finishes are something that will really drive up the price of rebuilding the home as you reach the conclusion of rebuilding the home. You know, the nuts and bolts, right? The foundation and the framing and things of that nature are going to be pretty consistent for most folks on a square foot basis, but it's those finishes and your preference on finishes that will really drive that final leg of the cost. So understanding your preferences for finishes and appliances and things of that nature in your home, and understanding if that fits in the parameters of what you have in terms of your benefit to rebuild your home is important to understand. And because rebuilding your home is truly on a spectrum, we got to find, at least one stake in the sand to at least begin to understand whether or not we need to explore increasing our coverage further. So I'm going to throw that stake in the sand at right about $175 a square foot. And if you're below that, especially if you're significantly below that, you want to explore how much it would cost to increase your coverage so that you're at that level. And if you're above that level, then perhaps you're going to be okay. But remember, this is a very specific and individual decision, and you need to understand, as I've mentioned, the finishes, the appliances, the things of that nature, to understand whether or not you have the appropriate amount of coverage in place. But what we're trying to prevent here is a very nasty surprise where you've been paying homeowners insurance premiums for a number of years. You have this unfortunate accident and a home being totaled, in my example, a storm, and you're unable to rebuild it exactly how you were hoping to rebuild it. And so we want to avoid that very disappointing result. And that's why we're bringing this message to you today. I think one other piece of that particular homeowner's insurance policy to understand is, do you have a lot of personal property belongings that really mean a lot to you? And do you have adequate coverage to replace that personal property? So understanding the value of your items that you have in your home is important, and understanding, do you have an appropriate amount of insurance in place to replace them? And then I think it's also important to understand what type of inventory records does your specific insurance company want to have if you have to go line item by line item and replace jewelry and replace different pieces of furniture and all the different things that can comprise your personal property. It's very important to understand what type of record keeping that the insurance company is going to want to have in place to justify the replacement of those items. So topic number 2 for today's discussion is a review of the deed to your home, as well as the mortgage if you have a mortgage on your home. Why do we want to review these two items? Well, if you're married and your spouse is not on the deed, that could mean that the house would have to go through probate if something happened to your spouse. That would just slow down, and that would create some headaches, that would create some time, and that would create some legal costs. But if the deed is titled jointly, then that would not be the case. You would avoid some of the legal headaches that go along with a very challenging situation of losing a spouse. So that's topic number one, to ensure, because for a number of different reasons, someone's name may or may not be left off of the deed. So I think it's just a really good topic as we're doing some sort of planning discussions with all of our clients throughout the year. We want to understand, is the deed set up so that it passes seamlessly and in line with what each of you desire. Topic number two is really important given what has happened to mortgage interest rates. If for whatever reason, only one person's name is on the mortgage, you want to make sure that you understand if that person passes away, does the surviving spouse have to refinance? This seems to be something that will be very specific to each individual mortgage company. So it's worth your while to take the 5 or 10 minutes and make the phone call and understand, hey, if something happens to me, is my spouse going to be required to refinance this mortgage? If so, you may want to consider moving your spouse onto that mortgage jointly, because if you're like many Americans who has a 2.5% to 3.5% interest rate from really wonderful interest rates a few years ago, you definitely want to keep that in place, because if you had to refinance tomorrow, you're going to be at 6.5% to 7%, and there's no reason to double your interest payments just simply because a spouse passed away. So understanding if the mortgage company requires you to have a jointly titled mortgage to avoid a refinance, I think is a really important topic, and something that was really worth the 5 or 10 minutes to review on the off chance that something happens to your spouse whose name is on the mortgage throughout the course of this calendar year or next, because it's reasonable to assume that we're not going to have interest rates in the 2.5% to 3.5% range anytime in the near future. So to summarize our 2 planning topics for 2023, we are focusing on a couple of things that we're just kind of cleaning up and polishing up, because it's not terribly likely that your home is totaled. That's why homeowners insurance is pretty affordable relative to that replacement value number you'll see in your deck pages. And it's not a high probability that you're going to lose your spouse this year, and that particular spouse is the one whose only name is on the mortgage. But it's worth the 5 or 10 minutes for each of those tasks. Take a little time and review, understand the situation you're in, think about, is this going to be an appropriate situation? Will the insurance in place help me manage rebuilding my home if it happened to be totaled? Is my mortgage in good shape where I don't have to refinance a 3% mortgage at 7% just because the spouse whose name was on the mortgage suddenly passed away? A couple of situations that not terribly likely to happen, are not a lot of fun, are very emotional, are very traumatic, and we're here to provide some guidance so that you can transition and deal with those situations if you happen to be faced with them as smooth as possible. So thanks so much for spending a couple of minutes with me today. And I look forward to the next time that we get together and have another educational planning discussion here from Five Plan Partners.